Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Brecht. Well, I'm for sure not a professional athlete, as you can see, but I did some bits and pieces. Thank you. I like the sports, to be honest. But we're not here to talk about sports. We're here to talk about the work I did for Médecins Sans Frontières and also the challenges we face in this work. Let me try. Yes. So I will start. I got this question to talk about my experience within MSF, and I'm sure if MSF would have sent someone else today, that you would have seen a totally different talk, a totally different perspective. So I will try to share my experiences with you today. And maybe to present myself, I choose the world map. I am an emergency physician. I graduated in 2018, but I did part of my training in South Africa and also part in the, not so really low-income country of Australia. And then in 2018, I joined Médecins Sans Frontières, and I'm going up and down between a job in the emergency department in Antwerp and then MSF. And we'll go a bit around the world with especially the work that we did with Médecins Sans Frontières. Anyone who's been to Sierra Leone? I don't see any hands. For what is Sierra Leone famous? Diamonds, yeah. For all other things? The war, unfortunately, they had a very brutal civil war in the 1990s till the beginning of 2000. And I think there is a 13... Sorry? Exactly. So in 1415, they had together with Guinea and Liberia the biggest Ebola outbreak ever in history. And so that's basically the context in which we work. And you will see already when we enter the town of Kenema, we will see maybe like 20 of these diamond shops, which otherwise I don't have anything to do, just to be clear, with diamonds. And you see we're in this area bordering Liberia and Guinea, where exactly also the hotspot of the Ebola crisis was in 1415. Okay, let's have a look to Kenema. Is it playing? I will try. Ik ben Brecht, Tavernier, urgentiearts. En ik ga jullie vandaag een dag meenemen door mijn werkdag hier in MSF Hanga Hospital in Kenema, Sierra Leone. Maar eerst moeten we een kwartiertje fietsen weg naar het werk. Part in Dutch, part in English, and go through. So, unfortunately, we're one of the areas with top 5 under 5 mortality and maternal mortality in the world. And I think this is quite a shocking statistic as well. In Belgium, and you are future medical doctors, we will have around 330 people, 1 medical doctor. We're right now in a country with per 50,000 people, 1 medical doctor. I think when I was working there, they had between 25 and 50 medical students for the whole country per year. And even a lot of them, they will move abroad to, typically places like the UK to work later. Okay, we are right now looking at the hospital, and I filmed this a bit shaky with my iPhone, sorry for, for the less quality of the images. But so we have the emergency department, we have on the right the intensive care. You see it's this kind of modular structure that they can build quite fast. And this is a malnutrition unit, or actually 2 malnutrition units. And then we have a Lassa isolation ward. We'll talk a bit later on Lassa as well. I was there in 19 and 20, and they were still doing big construction works to open a maternity and a neonatology ward. And actually one of my friends who's a gynecologist, she's working there right now. So they have opened last year.
So for The yellow zone, of course, these are just what we do. We just like stabilize sick children and then send them to the various area of admission.
In the red zone, we stabilize critically ill patients there for like a couple of minutes for those that are that will survive, because most often we have cases also that will die in the red zone.
Hier is de achterzijde van de intensieve zorgafdeling. En hier komen we op het gedeelte waarop
So you see the construction is there happening. And that unit has just opened some months ago. And then finally you see the offices and training. They try to make it not only an operational hospital, but very much a training unit for Western Africa. So I think there is a huge focus, even a lot more than in regular MSF projects, on learning and development. And so they are even building construction work, especially for training.
And I'm working here as the Learning and Development Manager for Nursing. And I'm working for the MSF Academy for Healthcare, who are here supporting the project. And their general objective is to improve the delivery of healthcare throughout the project. And this is through the delivery of professional and curriculum-based learning sessions, as well as continuing professional development sessions. There's two strains at the moment. There's the nursing area, and then there's the area for the medics. And we're also trying to do some multi-professional learning sessions involving a range of professionals in the medical team.
Quality. So for this reason, we say thank you. We thank you, MSF. Medicines are frontier for your good work, MSF. We say thank you, we appreciate you.
The guy who made this song in the end was, by the way, one of the doctors in the team. So they're quite creative as well with the things they come up. Okay, I was there for 6 months. And I was responsible for the emergency department. Especially I was responsible to train 9, what you would call probably physician assistants. So because there is this huge shortage of doctors, they have an in-between level, like I believe in many places in Africa, but also in the United States, for example, that I probably would describe as physician assistant, that also do basic diagnostic and therapeutic work. And so my main task was to train 9 of them. You will see that besides the emergency department, we had an ICU with, I think, 16 positions. We had an inpatient department and ITFC. Anyone who has an idea for what an ITFC is? So it's a unit for malnourished children, unfortunately. It's one of the places with this chronic malnutrition. In a place. Right now, maternity and neonatology are open, and as we showed already in the movie, there is a huge focus on learning and development. I arrived there 4 months after the opening, and I think this is quite an important thing within this cycle of projects. You probably already mentioned that we have this cycle of projects. You know, a new project opens whenever for some reason there is a demand, and this can be because of war, this can be because of a disease arising, but this can be also because of a chronic situation, which is very much the case in Sierra Leone, where you try to intervene and you start a cycle of a project that can be anything between maybe 1 year to 10, 15, or even longer. Some projects like Masisi in Congo, they have been going on forever. If you arrive, obviously, in the beginning, this means that a lot of the processes, you still have a lot of work in terms of establishing the process, in terms of training the staff. So probably it's more intense in the beginning, but also I think, or at least for me, it's obviously a lot more interesting. Okay, let's have a look inside. So this was a regular day, the board of the emergency department, and just have a look at what the typical pathologies that we were treating in our pediatric AD. So we have a 1-year-old with severe acute malnutrition, Sam, with kwashiorkor and dysentery that will be admitted to the malnourished ward. We have a 1-year-old with pneumonia, malaria, and hypoglycemia that was treated and will be admitted. We have a 7-year-old presenting with hemolysis. Yeah, sorry, my handwriting is not so good. That would receive extra tests in the department. And then we have a 3-year-old with severe malaria anemia. Probably one of the most life-saving things we did is transfusing blood for severe malaria. And there are a huge amount of children with this severe anemia as a complication of malaria admitted. And then there was a 1-year-old with uncomplicated malaria that's discharged. This would be the typical pathologies. You see already there is a massive burden of malaria, and this is a very seasonal thing, as you probably already aware. Okay, I understood you already had the chance with Marie to train for to put on the suits. Did anyone in the audience try to put on the suits? How did you experience it? Super hot, okay, so now you go to 45 degrees and you do exactly the same. So it is, I don't have a photo of me afterwards, but you can imagine I'm all sweating. So there is also a shower in the end. But inside the building though, when there is a technical possibility, like especially in these kind of structures, there is, we put, obviously, one of the first things you do is put air conditioning, because otherwise, just unfeasible to do too long. Like the tents they had as temporary Ebola treatment centers, yeah, you can imagine it's really a nightmare. A lot of the emergency preparedness and a lot of the energy in the project is going to Lhasa, because it's a Lhasa endemic zone, and this means, and please think about it, that, for example, in 6 months we diagnosed 1 case of Lhasa, and still there is continuously 1 expat doctor, who you see there in the photo, and together with the whole Lhasa team that is just there as this preparedness. Also, when there is a suspect case, they will isolate the patient, they get tested, either, like happens in the majority of cases, they are released because they are Lhasa negative, and then once you, you will have a positive case, okay, and then you take it from there. Lhasa is, does anyone know Lhasa by any chance? So Lhasa is a light version of Ebola. It's a viral hemorrhagic fever. And unfortunately, sometimes, as happens also with Ebola, outbreaks within healthcare, within the community, but then also later in healthcare institutions can happen. And so doctors and nurses have died from Lhasa. When I was there in another hospital, there was an outbreak, and actually two healthcare providers, including a Dutch doctor, they died. To give you an idea, when we had this 1 case, the patient was admitted first for 2 days within the hospital before the typical symptoms arised, and the testing was positive. You can understand that this kind of diseases, this brings stress to the team, and so there is this contact tracing, but the staff and also experts, you're worried that maybe you had this high-risk contact and so on, so you can understand that this brings a certain stress to the work. And so a lot what we do is try to, by training, by keeping the alertness level high, and by preparedness to cope with it, and to reduce the risks. Sorry. Yes, so these are some more photos of us trying to put on the suits and sweating really hard. This is the Lhasa is transmitted by a rat. So people are obsessed with, and especially the hygiene people, they're obsessed with trying to kill rats, or whenever they see a rat, like they go totally mad about trying to kill the rat. But the Lhasa belt is mainly in West Africa, and the main hotspots are actually Sierra Leone and Nigeria. Okay, so you see here every patient that was admitted to our hospital, every day the medical team had to go through the possible Lhasa symptoms, and so there was continuous supervision of all the patients for if they met the case definition, yes or no. If they met the case definition, the Lhasa team would come and evaluate the patient and then decide if they would get isolated and tested, yes or no. Just as with any, I would say, hemorrhagic fever, you're working in a chain, and this chain includes patient transfers, includes like the samples as well, especially how the samples are treated. And so there is a lot of training, not only on the medical care and the isolation, but also about how will we put this patient in an ambulance, how will we treat the samples. Imagine it's a whole like chain of let's say, organization you have to get right in order to reduce the risk of nosocomial spread. Okay, an ITFC, how does it work? In our ITFC, children are admitted mainly between 6 months and 5 years. You get a definition when they meet the criteria for severe acute malnutrition and they have a medical complication. And then you have also this criteria for younger babies. Luckily, because of breastfeeding, it's quite rare to see a child less than 6 months admitted to an ITFC. When this happens, it's mainly because of social reasons. You know, in some cases, unfortunately, the mom, and that's the most common situation, the mom has died during giving birth. Okay, so these are the typical conditions you would see as complications of severe acute malnutrition. This can be things like many septic shock, severe anemia, seizures, hypoglycemia, pneumonia, dysentery. I think this would be the main ones. What everyone who treated severely malnourished children will be able to confirm you is that the one moment you see these children and they look pretty much okay, you see that they're chronically unwell, but they're not super acutely sick. And then suddenly, 8 p.m. in the night, you get to see them. They're in severe respiratory distress. You see that their circulation is bad. You try to change the treatment, and 4 a.m. at night, they die. So you will see that their immune system, because of the protein problems, is almost non-existing, and so they unfortunately can pass away very rapidly, which is a very, very different dynamic with children with probably the same acute condition, but with a good, normally well-fed children. As you can imagine, dealing with children that are malnourished, it's not a problem you will solve in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days, which is actually the case with, for example, malaria or severe malaria anemia. I think it's quite a fun disease to treat. You give the IV artesunate, you give the antibiotics, you give a bag of blood. 2 days later, these children are playing as if nothing happened, and day 3, they go home, and you know, you're the happy doctor walking in the ward. This is a very different dynamic when you treat with malnourished children. This is obviously not a problem that is solved in 1 or 2 or 3 days. It's a problem that you treat the acute condition, but the underlying refeeding will take place over weeks and weeks and even months. And imagine for the children, but also for the caregivers who are with this child, that is continuously a caregiver with the child, they have to be really patient to go through these feeding periods and stay so many, often weeks in the hospital in terms to refeeding the child. In this, what they call phase 1 or the acute phase of refeeding, which typically will last 1 week, they have to feed every 3 hours. This means that also at nighttime, the nurses will wake up the department, and then they will wake up also the caregivers, give them milk, and this can also take a while. And then and this happens every 3 hours. It's quite an intense period also for the caregiver. On the other hand, there is also attention for quite some, rather fun aspects, and you try to entertain the guests, let's say. And this was a book I got from an Australian nurse as a present there. So about a possum. I don't know if anyone have heard of a possum, but that's a typical Australian animal. We would see some, and especially as an emergency doc, I think we have some interest in toxicology, and we would see some definitely weird phenomena that were also, as a medical doctor, really difficult to understand. And one problem we saw was herbal intoxication. And up to today, it's a topic that fascinates quite some people, but so people, sometimes whenever they are sick, they get given a combination of herbs. And then we would see them coming in, sometimes seizing, sometimes in shock, with quite some children dying within maybe 12 to 14 hours after arrival. The ones that got pulled through within 2 days, they were often completely normal again. So And then there was quite some discussion within the team what they were actually taking. I think they probably take some cyanide derivative, some plants they contain cyanide, and that they actually, unfortunately intoxicate themselves with a cyanide derivative from a plant. And so we see quite some of these children coming in that had this typical combination of symptoms, and then they would put in, nurses or often already did, put in an NGT, and then you would aspirate these herbs coming out. And so they would call it herbal intoxication, but like what exactly was causing the problem, up to today, it's not completely clear. Another example, what we were definitely seeing was children with paracetamol overdoses. We were for a while already observing that we had quite some children with liver and renal failure coming in our intensive care. And when you would take a detailed history with the parents or caregivers, they would tell you that the child, and often these young babies, they would have given like 3 grams or 4 grams of paracetamol in 24 hours. And there are actually these beliefs that whenever the fever is not going away, for example, you give a higher dose of paracetamol, and unfortunately pushing a child in liver failure. And also this, it's super difficult with a very limited lab and so on to prove your hypothesis. So you try to convince the colleagues, you could try to convince the team because actually paracetamol, has an antidote, acetylcysteine. And so we convinced Brussels to, make the acetylcysteine available for these cases. And then actually after I got back, a team in Liberia, they published a case series of exactly the same problem. So this kind of confirmed that we were actually probably right in our hypothesis. But so these are situations you will often come across that unfortunately with limited lab capacity, you can make an hypothesis, but it's very difficult to confirm what's exactly happening. We also had the snakes. You see a mamba and you see a cobra there. Actually, quite some of the guys, I must say, they're not scared of a snake, so they will try to slap it or kill it whenever they see one. I take a gentle distance when I see a snake. Quite some burns and also like infected burns, infected wounds. Cirrhosis is a teenager actually with quite some hepatitis B, and then a combination probably schistosomiasis with hepatitis B. What's our maximum capacity? And whenever you go into a project that's not in a high-income country, that's actually, and you speak to someone who's a bit experienced, this probably will the first question what they will ask is, what's our maximum healthcare capacity? So in there it was initially 5 liters of oxygen, which we could, when I was there, it was raised to 10 liters based on concentrators you need. IV and O access, but no central lines. We had the ultrasounds, but no X-rays at the time available. So imagine for a simple chest X-ray, we had to transfer a patient, which is now available. We had blood available and probably most life-saving drug we have available, which takes a lot of effort as well to keep your blood bank going. A lab without microbiology, which luckily also is now available, and then with chest trains and Foleys and nasogastric tubes. Okay, we did quite some simulation training, which I believe was really useful to get stuff going with the pediatric emergency cases. As you can imagine, the job includes quite some supervision work, and especially trying to transfer bits of this knowledge and the MSF protocols and so on, which actually the progress we made, I believe, in 6 months was really tremendous. If you could see how these 9 individuals and also the other team, what progress they made within 6 months, actually, I think it was truly unbelievable. If I talk about my personal challenges, this was my first mission. So just as any new organization, you have to get used to, some of the things of how they work or how we work, I would say. One of the things is probably that's a highly protocolized environment. So if you work in a Belgian hospital, you will find protocols and you will have the textbooks, but you will also have some degree of freedom to deviate from it, and if you can convince your colleagues, if they already ask about it, like that it's a smart idea, probably you'll get away with it. While within MSF, mainly because we have to train huge numbers of staff in dealing with a certain problem in a certain way, we try to stick very much to what is the protocol. And so this, I believe, especially as a doctor and especially as a specialist doctor, it's something you have to get used to, that even if you believe maybe something else is a bit different, no, you stick to the protocol and you communicate it clearly. Obviously some technical challenges, for example, chest trains. I had inserted quite some chest trains in, I think in South Africa, till children of 8 years old, but never in babies. We had regularly a baby with pneumonia admitted that needed a chest train with pneumonia plus emphysema, sorry. And I mean, this was quite a challenge. But then, of course, MSF has these technical consultants and that are, for example, for emergency medicine in my case. And so I could just WhatsApp and my colleague, and then he would say, and reassure me, basically explain me how to go through the steps. And exactly, it went well and exactly how he explained it. The use of ultrasound, you can imagine in this situation, is very interesting. Procedural sedation and analgesia are quite relevant, especially with the burns we saw. I believe this is probably something that's a challenge, is that you are working with this team and the project is going a certain way, but it's like you enter a hospital in Belgium and immediately you take a bit also the role of being involved in the strategy decisions of a hospital. And that's a bit how the work is with MSF. So immediately you're sucked into discussions about, should we do this, should we do that, where should we put our quality of care aim, these kind of discussions. And this leads also immediately to ethical discussions, like where do we put our quality standards. And imagine now that you're all, I believe Belgian medical students are studying in Belgium, but imagine now your team is a nurse supervisor from Zimbabwe and a Chinese medical supervisor, and your hospital director is a German doctor. It just was a case in Kenema when I was there, and now you all have to agree about, okay, these are our standards of care, this is our ambition. Believe me, that's not an easy task. And this also will lead to ethical discussions, which in itself are quite interesting, but also difficult. Okay, this is an example of a child with emphysema in which we inserted the drain, and you see the pus coming out. Actually quite impressive, these children, maybe in 4 or 5 days they will recover. An example of ultrasound invagination or intussusception on ultrasound, which it would be something you think about, but in Belgium obviously we would send these people to radiology and they would confirm, and now you are looking and thinking, is this it? And then luckily you have YouTube and you have the handbooks to double check and triple check, and then you say, okay, I believe it's correct, and you send these children for surgery. But the feeling or the pressure of this decision obviously is very different when you're the one making the call than when someone else makes the call. Okay, Sierra Leone, we talked about diamonds and the war and Ebola, which, I don't want to talk about but diamonds, but the other ones are obviously quite negative. But it's actually an incredibly beautiful country. It was one of the most beautiful rainforests in the world, and in the weekends when we were off, we could do some amazing hikes. This is Kwang, is emergency physician from Taiwan, and my colleague, and we went quite some ventures out with our maybe 40 euro bikes. Then after Saturday, we had to go to the market every time to get it fixed. So amazing beaches and forests, and it's really a beautiful place. Okay. We will move to Bujumbura. Anyone who has been to Burundi by any chance? Anyone who knows for what is Burundi famous? I was actually also reflecting on this question, and to be really honest, I also couldn't come up with something you would say, and they're really famous for this, even after I've been there. But so it's basically we're between Rwanda, Uganda, Lake Tanganyika, a very beautiful lake actually, and Bujumbura is on the shores of the lake. It's quite a beautiful location. Okay, so very different project. We're right now in a trauma project. And you see within the same pool of emergency doctors, we move from a pediatric project to a trauma project. A project that started in 2015 when there was an uprising of political violence. And these, let's say, these activists or like the activists, they were not treated in the Ministry of Health, Ministère de Santé hospitals. So these hospitals, they refused to treat these patients for political reasons. And so MSF stepped in. This would be a typical opener of an MSF campaign, just to provide healthcare, well, basically to anyone, but in this particular case, I mean, this was an opening. And so I was responsible for ED and ICU, and this was the last year of the project. This violence actually faded away in 2015, I believe 16 maybe, and then for maybe 4 or 5 years we were doing more regular trauma work. And so we were kind of closing the project. And then there is this kind of eternal challenge of how do you transfer what you build up during a certain period? You know, you trained people, you supplied material, you lifted also probably at some regional level the level of trauma care. How do you try that whenever you leave as an international medical organization, that the quality of care for trauma patients kind of, well, is still higher than it used to be before you arrived? And this actually is a very difficult kind of question. Okay, this was during full COVID, which in itself was a very interesting experience to travel during COVID. I took this selfie not so much for my face mask, but mainly for the other passenger laying on the bench. So you would see this is Addis Ababa airport in Ethiopia. It was just a layover. But so you would see people traveling in full, like kind of ready to go in an Ebola treatment center kind of dress on the way. So like a very kind of an experience in itself, and also the hotel quarantine and so on. Luckily, I think most of this has passed. So this would be the typical kind of pathology we would treat in our trauma unit. We have the classic open book fractures. We have a liver laceration. You see actually a humongous liver laceration. I think this is kind of from the left to the right, more than 15 centimeters, so that's really big. And you see they packed it, and so you see on the X-ray what you see, the white thing is caused basically from the packing, so damage control surgery, and then reoperate after 1 to 2 days. And then, yeah, depending on the situation, final surgery or even longer open abdomen. So you could hear Spanish. These are a Mexican surgeon doing a nephrectomy for a renal bleed, post-traumatic renal bleeding. Expensive neck hematoma, mainly a challenge for the anesthesiologist for intubation. It's actually with a knife that they put it. Sorry, I'm like pushing with all my force on this thing. Probably. Yes, open fractures, a lot of them you would see, like wash them out, and then external fixation. This is a very typical discussion also in the trauma project is, do you stick to only external fixation? Or do you also go to internal fixation? Obviously, when you work in a Belgian orthopedic unit, 99% of your trauma work is internal fixation. Very different, first of all, because of the severity of the wounds. Imagine this, you will have to treat with external fixation, but also the risk of infective complications of putting material inside of internal fixation is a lot higher, and also long-term complications. So that's actually a very like typical point of discussion at strategic level in this kind of surgery project. And sometimes also quite frustrating for orthopedic surgeons. Typically chest trauma, you can see here chest strains inserted. A lot of luxations, here you see elbow luxation, unfortunately also sometimes amputations. This would be the typical kind of injuries you would treat in this project. Okay, this was at the final phase, so we were preparing to kind of hand over the project to a regional hospital, and this was this regional hospital, Hôpital Prince Regional Charles, still built by the Belgians. They were in the colonial area, to give you an idea. And so then there is all this work around this, that we were preparing a 1-year support basically of this hospital with part of the staff, like kind of a skeleton team, that would continue the work for 1 more year. And so together with our colleagues, we wrote this training and improvement plan specifically for everything related to trauma care, so the emergency department, intensive care, and orthopedic surgery mainly. And actually one of my friends, who also is a colleague in Antwerp and then an emergency doctor, which I didn't know when I was writing it, but he took the position, and actually turned out that quite some of the things we had in mind worked out well, so that was fun to hear. It's obviously a bit weird because you're there for a certain amount of time. A lot of what you do is you prepare for the one who's coming after you, because we're kind of in a pool of emergency docs, just so you have a pool of ops and gynaes and so on. But so you will not get to do a lot of the work you are preparing, which is kind of, I would say, trust the process, or how would some companies say it, something like this. But it's kind of weird because if you're working in Belgium, you know you have these strategy plans, and you know you will be involved in the execution. And that's very different when you're there for maybe 3 months or 6 months. You will probably not be the one executing it, but still it's obviously the work in the future preparation is very important. Okay, Burundi as well is actually a very beautiful country, and there are some nice things to see, like this beautiful waterfall. I'll move a bit with the stage to here. Maybe it works better from this side. Yes, okay. So personal challenges, mainly about this transition management aspect, doing these assignments or assessments of the new place, writing a proposal for this 1-year transition, and also making a job description for my successor. I think these are very different kind of things you would do in let's say, daily life in a Belgian hospital. It was quite interesting. And then the final project I did was in Gaza. I was there from October till December. Well, anyone has been to Gaza by any chance? No? Well, it's probably unless you are Palestine, the most difficult place to enter, I would say. Because you all know, I don't have to ask why Gaza is famous, unfortunately. This was a very, very different project. So the war between Israel and Palestine has these escalations, which typically are quite short. Last escalation, I think, was 4 days. The one before, I believe, was 7 days. And within 7 days, these emergency departments, and I think there are 7 on the whole Gaza Strip, they get flooded by patients. And so when they are on regular activity, they're managing quite well. It's also, they have definitely quite some human resources. They have trained people. They have, I would say, quite okay equipment. Although, they definitely struggle with quite some things, even in regular activity. But then suddenly, when there is this escalation in the war, they literally get flooded by patients. And they showed me some photos of the last escalation. Maybe in 1 hour, they had 200 patients coming in a department that treats 100 patients in 24 hours regularly. So this is actually a very particular challenge. And so what happened was, after the last escalation, a lot of the doctors, they felt that they were actually not well prepared, that they didn't do, let's say, at the max of their capacity. And I also felt quite some surgeons and emergency doctors that they actually felt a bit of guilt when you would talk to them and when you got to know them, that the feeling they could have done better actually. And so the Ministry of Health of Palestine sent out a call to international actors to assist with especially this question. How can you prepare better for this search in patient case in trauma whenever there is an escalation? And so this was more a consultancy project, I would almost say, where we basically kind of consulted together with the Ministry of Health, looking into, in our situation, for one emergency department, and then after a while moving to the next one in terms of how we could assist them and especially train them in terms of better dealing with this situation. So this is a very different project where there was a lot of focus on assessment, on consultancy, and also part of it was training. And this all in an extremely difficult political context. I will not talk too much about it, and I'm not talking about the Israeli-Palestine situation, but I'm really talking about the situation within Palestine. Okay, so I believe it was very interesting, but also super complicated project also for let's say our medical coordinator and head of mission, very difficult to manage. These are some photos. I didn't take too much photos because of the situation, but the Gaza Strip, you have to imagine, it's very small. It's like 40K like this, 10K like this, and it's fully surrounded by, well, Israel and on the south side, the Rafah border with Egypt. And so where we could stand, I think you can even see this weird thing just at the horizon. It's actually already a balloon of the Israeli Defense Force. They have this kind of Zeppelin-like structures. I don't know how to better describe it, from where they kind of, I don't know what they do from the balloon, but some kind of spying activity, or I don't know if it's any with the rockets or something. But so you know, when you see the drones and you hear the drones, and on the sea you see the Israeli Navy vessels like patrolling on the, so it's a very, like they describe it as an open air prison, which is probably the best description you can, describe it. If I have some more general reflections on the work and to conclude basically my talk, I would say that the project and the specificities of the project will determine a lot how your daily work will look like. We saw 3 different projects, 3 completely different experiences. So whenever you get a proposal for a project, just by the nature of it, you already have some idea about what to expect, but this will also very much affect how your, let's say, daily work and your day will look like. There is a huge variety, which I believe is really interesting. There is, wherever you go, there will be a huge focus on training and coaching. So if you like training, if you like coaching, I mean, it can be really rewarding and very interesting. By the way, whenever I'm in Belgium, I'm also very much involved in training. Well, there are a lot of children in the world, so especially in low-income countries, you will see and you will treat a lot of children. So whenever you decide to go, make sure your pediatric skills are somewhere okay. And automatically, you will quite quickly get some managerial responsibilities, which is obviously very interesting, but also a challenge. You can learn a lot from it. You will always be somehow a coach, so don't worry about this. And well, I would say you learn a lot from it. It's a lot of fun as well, like you will have tremendous fun, you will meet really lovely people from all around the world, but it can be tough from time to time. Maybe my last advice is this was my first stay in Sierra Leone, and we just did a bit of strolling in the city, and I was the most sunburned I've been in my life, basically, so don't forget the sunscreen, the sun is really trying to kill you. Yes, sorry. If you have some questions, but I understand we will have a Q&A. And then also I have something, a new project in my life, let's say, and this is still my daughter, so she will be supportive in the future as well for the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. de Tavernier. Let's have a seat and let's discuss a little bit unfortunately, we won't be able to have that many questions because you were really extensive
Sorry
in your
for that.
speech. Not in a bad way, but you did give a lot of details and information about your experience. So, ladies and gentlemen, who would like to ask any kind of questions to Dr. de Tavernier? Raise your hand, please. Otherwise, I will shoot first. Nobody? No questions? Come on. Really? Come on, pass the microphone. Please stand up.
Hi. What kind of doctor are more needed? I don't know if that's correct.
It's a good question. Actually, MSF looks for all different sorts of doctors, and we send from all different specialties people to the field. I would say mainly people who are involved with acute care, think about obs and gynae, think about pediatrics, think about surgery, emergency medicine, but also psychiatry. And there is definitely last couple of years a lot more attention for like mental health care. You can imagine a huge problem in quite some circumstances. And then also quite some family doctors. Maybe related to this, I would say, because we get this question quite often, is after graduation, can you go straight away? And I think the internal requirement of MSF is to have 2 years of medical experience, which I think makes a lot of sense. Quite some of the places in the world, they train basic doctors now themselves, and so somehow you will be involved in supervision, in quality improvement, so you will need to have some firm background yourself, let's say, before you will reach that stage. But so the profiles that are needed, they are really as diverse as a Belgian hospital, I would say.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the needs are far bigger than what we can provide. So if you feel yourself into doing this kind of humanitarian work, I guess you guys are more than happy to welcome all kinds of practitioners. Next question?
Hi, thank you for the lecture, and I wanted to ask about the projects that you had. How do you define them, the result of the project, that it's successful? What are criteria for this one? And if there like the sense to go for the next projects?
So your question is, thank you for your question, how we define if a project is a success or not. Okay, this is probably the most difficult question and the most difficult discussion you will face in any discussion. And this will be so heavily debated within the project, within the strategy. Like, there is a project, there is also what they call the cell, which is the coordination in Brussels, often doing the coordination. You start by defining what is the need. So it starts by there's a need, and this can be really easy. There is an Ebola outbreak in West Africa. You see, to give you an idea, the Kenema Government Hospital, they had 37 doctors and nurses that died during the Ebola outbreak. So their hospital was just kind of completely demolished by a virus. So there is very clearly a need, and there is very clear what is your objective. You try to save the lives, you try to keep the healthcare structure somehow surviving, so afterwards they can continue. In other circumstances, this is much more difficult to determine. For example, the aim in why we are there now in Sierra Leone is you want to reduce maternal mortality and you want to reduce under 5 mortality, which is something you can measure, but before you have this influence, let's say in a region, it takes 3, 4, 5 years, even some people will say 10 years. And there is often this worry that whenever you leave or the project is ended, things will go back to as it was before. So I would say this is a heavily debated topic, and very much depending on the context, you have the answer. But we always try to measure, and a lot more, to be honest, than in a Belgian hospital, for example. We try to measure what are our goals and what are our, let's say, key performance indicators or something. But it's not always as simple as it sounds.
What about the fear factor? Because you've been to really tough situations. So obviously not your family man. What kind of factor the fear plays in?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I think you're, despite the circumstances, in a very well protected, I would say very restricted environment. So the first thing, even before you will get sent anywhere, you will have a whole safety document which basically will outline you all the risks that you're aware of. You will sign that document even before taking an airplane. Next thing will happen is you will arrive in some kind of a capital probably. You will have a huge discussion with quite some responsibles, and there will be a lot of safety instructions. So the whole process, and this will be, depending on the situation, updated even daily or weekly or depending on the circumstance. There is this whole kind of, you try to rationalize the risks, and I think this is a way how to deal with it. The other thing is that you have the medical staff, doctors, nurses, and psychologists and so on, and then you have all the, let's say, what we call coordination and the logistics and supply, and they take care of everything what's related security. So I will basically probably never have to decide on, we will evacuate or no, this is very clear, another decision. My responsibility is to treat patients and, try, I don't know, that the hospital is running somehow. But I think this is one way to deal with it. Obviously, this does not take away that it is a stressor. And some people have very probably different ways, just as you all experience some kind of stress to deal with it. For example, people will be quite heavily into sports, and even in a compound, they will make sure you have like a bike, so you can spend hours on a bike, or you go running or whatever, or some people, they watch a movie, or you talk within the team. But despite all of this, sometimes, there is only so much you can take, But I would say and also the organization puts a lot of attention in mental health. So you will get quite some communication around mental health. They will talk about this. They will talk about the stress. When you get back, especially from some of the more challenging environments, I think about Afghanistan or Yemen right now, you will have an obligatory debriefing with a psychologist as well. There is a lot of attention for this. But
one last question.
Okay, I just wanted to know, have your experience abroad changed your way of practicing medicine in Belgium, for example?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Just as any experience will change a bit how you look at things, definitely did. I think you are more aware of also the cost of certain things. You will see some colleagues in Belgium, they will just throw tremendous amount of very expensive things, and so I'm probably a lot more cost conscious, I would say, about what is the certain cost of it, what is there is probably also this bit of social or international experience. Whenever I have a patient now from Palestine in my department, I probably also understand a bit better, although I'm not an anthropologist and I will never become one. But whenever you see certain what we call healthcare seeking behaviors, why some people culturally will react more like this or this, and you can imagine I work in Antwerp, we see quite some people from all around the world. I'll probably understand a little bit better what's behind it. But what does change you? That's almost a philosophical question, right? But probably it did, yeah.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Brecht de Tavernier, for this incredible lecture about your international experience.